So this is me collecting stories as an immigrant, but also showing how you might see the world differently to walk as an immigrant, and how you might actually see immigrants differently by way of walking. And I started off with Jane Jacobs, who wrote The Death and Life of Great American Cities. And she has this lovely line from that book that forever hovers over me when I'm walking and reminds me some of the things that can happen by walking. Especially if you're broke, this is a line to hold closely to. By its nature, the metropolis provides what otherwise could only be given by traveling, namely, the strange. And Alfred Kazin, who says, "Oh, New York, New York, carousel and carnival of the too rich, busy, full life. How can one ever do justice to your insane human fullness?" We'll come back to Kazin as to why that's important. One cold spring night, the promise of summer held back as if inspired. You have to understand, I'm Jamaican, so anything below 70 counts as cold. Anything below 30, God hates you. One cold spring night, the promise of summer held back as if inspired. I emerged from a subway station on the edge of Williamsburg, on my way to meet a friend for dinner. I noticed an Orthodox Jew in characteristic all-black attire and shritmel walking swiftly towards me. I assumed that he found me suspicious, a not rare enough reaction to the mundane fact of my having black skin, and so was advancing threateningly to ward off the danger I was presumed to be. I began to move away from him, but not too quickly, lest I appear all the more guilty. He altered course to intercept me, like a bullet that wouldn't be denied its target. I zigged, hoping that a quick veer would get me away from him. But somehow, he managed to close the distance between us. He didn't walk so much as he glided. Perhaps the man was a ninja and I had scanned him wrong. I stopped and flinched, thinking, not the face, please. Vanity. But he leaned in and with gentle insistence asked, "Would you like to do a good deed?" There is an undertone of challenge to the question, but also an irresistible strain of pleading. I answered yes, and he made a sharp turn and said, "Follow me." It's almost like he's collecting disciples, the way he said. He took me around a corner where an older man stood with 3 young kids huddled beside him. "Follow the rabbi," my chaperone said. So I followed the rabbi, who crossed the road, children in tow, entered the synagogue, climbed the high stairs that overlooked this majestic hall. There he stopped and entered a modest kitchen. He instructed me to unplug a kettle. When I had done so, the rabbi graciously bid me goodbye, and I stepped out onto the windy sidewalk, ready to rush to my appointment. You have to understand, I'm Jamaican, and so I'm always rushing to appointments. There's Jamaican time and there's Garnet time, which is add an hour and a half to Jamaican time. But my good deed wasn't done, apparently. The friendly ninja said, "There's more. Come with me." Off we went, down the road to what turned out to be his own apartment. His wife and 2 curious children were standing in the living room. They'd been waiting for hours, I was told, for whomever was ready to perform a good deed on a Saturday night. It was a Jewish holiday, Shabbat. And he had me set his thermostat at the desired temperature and turn on his dryer, which had wet clothes in it. As I was checking appliances, he asked what I did for a living. "I'm a writer," I answered, and he asked me to email him my work. I looked at the email address he provided me and tried to repress a smile. It was the kind of address I'd expect from a playful teenager, something like "Sweet Baby 65, something like that. I will tell you, I know the exact email, but I don't want to email this guy go, "No, what's up with that email?" But it's the kind of email address I expected from a playful teenager, not from this distinguished-looking Orthodox Jew who was graciously insisting on giving me food for my journey. I explained that I needed nothing. A good deed should be its own reward after all. Plus, I was on my way to eat Japanese food. But he insisted that I shouldn't leave empty-handed and gave me a freezy. "Look, it's kosher," he reassured me. So I stepped out. A neighbor was waiting in the hallway. He beckoned me to an apartment 1 floor below, where I turned on lights to discover about a dozen people standing in the living room, no longer in the dark because I'd flipped a switch. I'm not sure if you remember X-Files. It's like one of those X-Files episodes when I flipped. I'm like, oh great, here my brains are going to be eaten. There's like a dozen people that's in the dark, just standing still. I didn't have the heart to ask how long they'd congregated there in the darkness. Thermostat and kettle checked, I finally made my way out of this building, populated with people who depended on the kindness of strangers. Out on the quiet sidewalk, I looked around. No one was waiting to accost me. I stared up at the building, and the darkness in the windows tugged at me. Were people up there waiting for hands willing to work on the Sabbath? Would they shout for assistance if they saw me? The only sound I heard was the whistle of a wind that rushed down to push me along, as if someone had whispered that I was late. Well, people are always shouting that I was late, but this time it felt like something was whispering that I was late. Suddenly, these sidewalks where I'd walked dozens of times before, became a place more revealing and more mysterious. New York City does that to you. It sneaks up on you. It sneaks up on you and promises that there is always more to see, to hear, to know. And I should pause because New Yorkers have this like a chip on their shoulder. And I'm in New York, but like, oh, there's always more to see here than everywhere else. I mean, we could say this just about any other place. It just so happens I'm talking about New York, so I'm saying that here now. It surprises you with its inexhaustibility. At the same time, it reminds you that there is much that is hidden because of the basic algebra in which knowledge equals identity. Behind what is revealed lie layers of national histories and cultural rituals and religious traditions and family lore. The city is a fossil record, and every layer you peel back exposes another layer whose contours reveal only our limitations in knowing the city. And yet, New York is as ready to give up itself as it is apt to withhold itself. Nowhere is this tendency to announce its marvels while simultaneously whispering its secrets is as interwoven as within its immigrant communities. And I go on to talk about that. I even defend Times Square and celebrate Times Square, if you can believe in such a thing. And as Whitman used to say, I contain multitudes, because in an earlier essay, I actually criticized and mocked Times Square. So I can't seem to make up my mind when I'm walking as to whether I love it or hate it, but both are true. But one of the things I set out to do in this essay, which is in a book called Non-Stop Metropolis, and I call it Round and Round. And I like playing and making allusions with titles. That Round and Round, if you're a Prince fan, you remember that song that Prince wrote that, I forgot his name, that song called Round and Round, but he talks about the world going round and round, the continual discovering of other people, but discovering yourself at the same time. But also, every year I take an adventure in which I walk for 24 hours straight without stopping in New York, and I go all 5 boroughs. I always get a lot of people say, I'm coming to this year, I'm doing it. And so for the first 2 to 3 hours, I have loads of people along with me, and one by one they fall off. So by hour 4, it's just me alone. And this one guy called Matt Green, who's walking every single borough of every block of every borough in New York City. So he's been doing it the last 7 years, it's almost done now. But I do that partially to sort of have the sense that you can see the whole world, on your feet like that. But part of it is something that I'm trying to push against. We've gotten so obsessed with mastery. I mean, some of you know it here that by the time you're in 7th grade, you decide, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to be a lawyer, I'm going to arrange everything to do that. Or I'm not doing class with Michael because he gives out too much B's, and this B is going to affect my desire to do this or to do that. And so we've gotten so obsessed with mastery, we've allowed it to hem ourselves in, and the idea is to know more, even to walk to know more. But I walk to remind us of how much mysteries there are, to remind me of how much I don't know. Just when I think I understand the Guyanese, I just walk through the Guyanese neighborhood 2 or 3 times and I recognize, oh, I'm really ignorant, I really need to know more. But I also talk in a sense about the way we think we actually know our culture, based on its cuisine. It's like, I forgot his name, it's Akhil Sharma, who people say, oh, you're Indian? I love Indian food. And he always says, on behalf of Indian food, I thank you. So the idea that, oh, I know one in aspect of a culture, or even know a culture's cuisine, and I still don't know the culture. I do this as a way to walk and to remind ourselves what it is to be confronted with mystery, and the way mysteries draw us in, the way mysteries make us know more, hunger to know more. And there are two ways of thinking of, there's a kind of exclusion now that you hear people talk about more and more about, keeping in a certain culture or ethnicity at bay. And that's an exclusion, that's a way of being left out, to be pushed against, to be made unwelcome. But there's a way of being left out of in an ethnicity or in a group, that has its traditions, that has its way of connecting with each other, that is foreign to you, and it's only by continual exposure, giving yourself over more and more to it, that you're even closer, but it feels more mysterious and excluded. And so that's the kind of exclusion I'm celebrating in this essay. But let me move on to another essay, something that I hinted at in this first one. So there's a way of walking through the city and thinking how fluid it is. The old idea of the flaneur, that 19th century figure like Walter Benjamin and Baudelaire and others, just walking and observing from a distance and saying, oh, the city's like this, here are the patterns I'm observing, here's the behavior I'm observing. But then it becomes a lot more complicated if you're, say, a woman, or if you're, say, black, that to stay at bay, to be observant rather than to be observed, to move in a way that's irregular, because the flaneur sort of is in search of serendipity, that you keep trying to find surprises, you just keep trying to get lost and see what you will learn. In a black person, for example, walking around aimlessly is a person asking for the cops to be called on him or her. A woman walking and looking lost is someone prone to have the wrong kind of attention, and to have people making sexual advances or giving compliments she's sick and tired of hearing. And so the flaneur is not a position or a role available to us all. But I also wanted to talk about the ways in which walking sometimes can make us arrive in a city, as I'm talking here about being an immigrant, and you get to know a city more and more as you walk through it. But walking can sometimes be a painful reminder of the inability to fully arrive, to fully call somewhere home, because the ways in which it continually keeps you at bay, that walking reminds you of some of the very real and very painful social and cultural and racial fractures that we have and are yet to be healed. So this was originally called Black and Blue. It got republished on Literary Hub as Walking While Black, but I call it Black and Blue because I wanted people to remember the opening of Ralph Ellison's Invisible Man, where you hear black and blue, and he's talking about this idea of being black and at once being invisible but too visible. But also black and blue because of this story, this all too horrible story about the terrible relationship between law enforcement and black citizens, what it's like to be the people in blue and black bodies. And black and blue also because of that wonderful song that from with Fat Swallow, what did I do to be so black and blue? My only sin is my skin. And black and blue also because my walking began partially out of a lot of black and blue moments of having a stepfather with too heavy a hand. So I'll read a part of this and then have you throw tomatoes or ask questions. My love for walking started in childhood, out of necessity. No thanks to a stepfather with heavy hands, I found every reason to stay away from home and was usually out, at some friend's house or the street party where no man should be, until it was too late to get public transportation. So I walked. The streets of Kingston, Jamaica in the 1980s were often terrifying. You could, for instance, get killed if a political henchman thought you came from the wrong neighborhood, or even if you wore the wrong color. Wearing orange showed affiliation with one political party, and green with the other. And if you were neutral or traveling far from home, you chose your colors well. The wrong color in the wrong neighborhood could mean your last day. No wonder then that my friends and the rare nocturnal passerby declared me crazy. I mean, they still declare me crazy for many other reasons, but then declared me crazy for my long late-night treks that traversed warring political zones. And sometimes I did pretend to be crazy, shouting non-sequiturs when I passed through especially dangerous spots, such as a place where thieves had hid on the banks of a storm drain. Predators would ignore or laugh at a kid in his school uniform speaking nonsense. So I'd see them hiding and I started speaking like I was this crazy person and they left me alone. I mean, I think then I thought that I pulled one on them, but maybe they just thought, let's just harass this guy. You know, he's making such a good effort. Let him pretend that that's what's getting him past. I made friends with strangers and went from being a very shy and awkward kid to being an extroverted, awkward one. The beggar, the vendor, the poor laborer. Those were experienced wanderers, and they became my nighttime instructors. They knew the streets and delivered lessons on how to navigate and enjoy them. I imagined myself as a Jamaican Tom Sawyer. One moment sauntering down the street to pick low-hanging mangoes that I could reach from the sidewalk. Another moment hanging outside a street party with battling sound systems, each armed with speakers piled to create skyscrapers of heavy bass. These streets weren't frightening. They were full of adventure when they weren't serene. There I joined forces with a band of merry walkers who would miss the last bus by mere minutes, our feet still moving as we put out our thumbs to hitchhike to spots nearer home, making jokes as vehicle after vehicle raced past us. Or I'd get lost in mythic moments, my young mind imagining alternate futures. The streets had their own safety. Unlike at home, there I could be myself without fear of bodily harm. Walking became so regular and familiar that the way home became home. The streets had their rules, and I loved the challenge of trying to master them. I learned how to be alert to surrounding dangers and nearby delights, and prided myself on recognizing telling details that my friends missed. Kingston was a map of complex and often bizarre cultural and political and social activity, and I appointed myself its nighttime cartographer. I'd know how to navigate away from a predatory pace, and to speed up the chat when the cadence of a gate announced friendliness. It was almost always men I saw. A lone woman walking in the middle of the night was as common a sight as Sasquatch. I think maybe the younger people here don't know what Sasquatch is. Bigfoot. Moonlight pedestrianism was too dangerous for her. Sometimes at night, as I made my way down the hills above Kingston, I'd have the impression that the city was set on pause or in extreme slow motion. Once I descended, I was cutting across Jamaica's deep social divisions. I'd made my way briskly past the mansions in the hills overlooking the city, now transformed into a carpet of dotted lights under a curtain of stars, sauntered by middle-class subdivisions hidden behind high walls crowned with barbed wire, and zigzagged through neighborhoods of zinc and wooden shacks, crammed together and leaning like a tight-knit group of limber dancers. With my descent came an increase in the vibrancy of street life, except when it didn't. Some poor neighborhoods had both the violent gunfights and the eerily deserted streets of the cinematic Wild West. I knew well enough to avoid those, even at high noon. I had begun hoofing it after dark when I was 10 years old. By 13, I was rarely home before midnight, and some nights found me racing against dawn. If I can just get there before my mom wakes up. My mother would often complain, "Make you love streets, so you're born in a hospital, you never born in a street." Or a translation for the Americans, "Why do you love the streets so much? You were born in a hospital, not in the streets." I left Jamaica in 1996 to attend college in New Orleans, a city I'd heard called the northernmost Caribbean city. By the way, what I mean by northernmost Caribbean city is that everything seems to move at a slower pace and there are pretty houses. You know, they're not exactly sure what I mean by that, beyond that. But that's a story for a different day. I wanted to discover, on foot of course, what was Caribbean and what was American about it. Stately mansions on oak-lined streets with streetcars clanging by, brightly colored houses that made entire blocks look festive. People in resplendent costumes dancing to funky brass bands in the middle of the street. Cuisine, the cuisine. Cuisine and aromas that mashed up culinary traditions from Africa, Europe, Asia, and the American South. And a juxtaposition of words old and new, odd and familiar. Who would want to explore this? On my first day in the city, I went walking for a few hours to get a feel for the place and to buy supplies to transform my dormitory room from a prison bunker into a welcoming space. I'm sure some of you know that feeling. When some university staff members found out what I had been up to, they warned me to restrict my walk into the places recommended as safe to tourists and the parents of freshmen. They trotted out the statistics about New Orleans' crime rate, but Kingston's crime rate dwarfed those numbers, and I decided to ignore the well-meant cautions. A city was waiting to be discovered, and I wouldn't let inconvenient facts get in the way. These American criminals are nothing on Kingston's, I thought. They're no real threat to me. Within days, I noticed that many people in the street seemed apprehensive of me. Some gave me a circumspect glance as they approached, and then they crossed the street. Others, ahead, would glance behind, register my presence, and then speed up. Older white women clutched their bags. Young white men nervously greeted me, as if exchanging a salutation for their safety. "What's up, bro?" On one occasion, less than a month after my arrival, I tried to help a man whose wheelchair was stuck in the middle of a crosswalk. He threatened to shoot me in the face, then asked a white pedestrian for help. I wasn't prepared for any of this. I had come from a majority black country in which no one was aware of me because of my skin color. Now, I wasn't sure who was afraid of me. I was especially unprepared for the cops. They regularly stopped and bullied me, asking questions that took my guilt for granted. I had never received what many of my African American friends call the talk. No parents had told me how to behave when I was stopped by the police, how to be as polite and cooperative as possible, no matter what they said or did to me. So I had to cobble together my own rules of engagement, thicken my Jamaican accent, pretend to be the tourist, quickly mention my college, accidentally pull up my college ID card when asked for my driver's license. My survival tactics began well before I left my dorm. I got out of the shower with the police in my head, assembling a cop-proof wardrobe, light-colored Oxford shirt, V-neck sweater, khaki pants, truckers, sweatshirt or t-shirt with my university insignia. When I walked, I regularly had my identity challenged, but I also found ways to assert it. So, I dressed Ivy League style, but would later on add my Jamaican pedigree by wearing Clark's desert boots. See, I have on one now. The footwear of choice of Jamaican street culture. If you think this is an exaggeration, just go to YouTube and enter Clark's Vibes Carter. There are like hundreds of songs in Jamaica about Clark shoes. Hundreds. It's a strange thing. It's also the country in which you play Celine Dion dance hall and people fire gunshots in the air. But I'll tell you that story a different day. Yet the all-American sartorial choice of white t-shirt and jeans, which many police officers see as a uniform of black troublemakers, was off limits to me. At least, if I wanted to have the freedom of movement I desired. In this city of exuberant streets, walking became a complex and often oppressive negotiation. I would see a white woman walking towards me at night and cross the street to reassure that she was safe. I would forget something at home and not immediately turn around if someone was behind me, because I discovered a sudden backtrack could cause alarm. I had a cardinal rule: keep a wide perimeter from people who might consider me a danger. If not, danger might visit me. New Orleans suddenly felt more dangerous than Jamaica. The sidewalk was a minefield, and every hesitation and self-censored compensation reduced my dignity. Despite my best efforts, the street never felt comfortably safe. Even a simple salutation was suspect. One night, returning to the house that 8 years after my arrival, I thought I'd earned the right to call my home, I waved at a cop driving by. Moments later, I was against his car in handcuffs. When I later asked him, sheepishly of course, Any other way would have asked for bruises. Why he had detained me, he said my greeting aroused his suspicion. No one waves to the police, he explained. When I told friends of his response, it was my behavior, not his, that they saw as absurd. No, why would you do a stupid thing like that, said one. You know better than to make nice with police. Questions? Huh?
How much longer does it?
Oh, I still have more time to read away? Okay. My friends always tell me to shut up, so it's always hard that, yeah. It's one of those rare occasions where I actually am the one stopping before I'm being stopped. Oh, good. No, this is one of the miracle days, you know. We should actually note the time, the place, and dates. I can actually tell friends that I was the one who stopped before I was told to shut up. A few days after I left on a visit to Kingston, Hurricane Katrina slashed and pummeled New Orleans. I'd gone not because of the storm, but because my adoptive grandmother, Pearl, was dying of cancer. I hadn't wandered those streets in 8 years since my last visit, and I returned to them, now mostly at night. I'm a night walker. If you ever see somebody walking at 2 o'clock in the morning, that's me. This time, I found best for thinking, praying, crying. I walked to feel less alienated from myself, struggling with the pain of seeing my grandmother terminally ill, and from my home in New Orleans, underwater and seemingly abandoned, from my home country, which now, precisely because of its childhood familiarity, felt foreign to me. I was surprised by how familiar those streets felt. Here was the corner where the fragrance of jerk chicken greeted me, along with a warm, tender, and peace and love message of Half Pine's greetings, broadcast from a small but powerful speaker to at least a half-mile radius. It was as if I had walked into 1986 down to the soundtrack, and there was the wall of the neighborhood shop, adorned with the Rastafarian colors, red, green, and gold, along with images of local and international heroes, Bob Marley, Marcus Garvey, and Haile Selassie. Though I've been told that recently Obama has been jumping on the walls alongside them. They're making some late addition of late. The crew of boys leaning against it, joshing each other, were recognizable. Different faces, but similar stories. I was astonished at how safe the streets felt to me. Once again, one black body among many, no longer having to anticipate the many ways my presence might instill fear, and how to offer some reassuring body language. Passing police cars were once again merely passing police cars. Jamaican police could be pretty brutal, make no joke about it, but they didn't notice me the way American police did. I could be invisible in Jamaica in a way I can't be invisible in the United States. Walking had returned me to a greater sense of possibilities. And why walk, if not to create a new set of possibilities? Following serendipity, I added new routes to the mental maps I had made from old pathways. Serendipity, a mentor once told me, is a secular way of speaking of grace. It's unearned favor. Seen theologically then, walking is an act of faith. Walking is, after all, interrupted falling. We see, we listen, we speak, and we trust that each step we take won't be our last, but will lead us into a richer understanding of the self and the world. In Jamaica, I once again felt as if the only identity that mattered was my own, not the constructed one that others had constructed for me. I strolled into my better self. I said, along with Kierkegaard, I've walked myself into my best thoughts. Continue?
Sure.
When I tried to return to New Orleans from Jamaica a month later, there were no flights. I thought about flying to Texas so I could make my way back to my neighborhood as soon as it opened for reoccupancy. But my adoptive aunt, Maxine, who hated the idea of me returning to a hurricane zone before the end of hurricane season, persuaded me to come stay in New York City instead. To strengthen her case, she sent me an article about Texans who were buying up guns because they were afraid of the influx of black people from New Orleans. That really did it. I bought a ticket immediately to New York. This wasn't a hard sell. I wanted to be in a place where I could travel by foot, and more crucially, continue to reap the solace of walking at night. And I was eager to follow in the footsteps of the essayists. Poets and novelists who had wandered the great city before me: Walt Whitman, Herman Melville, Alfred Kazin, Elizabeth Hardwick, James Baldwin, James Weldon Johnson. I had visited the city before, but each trip had felt like a tour in a sports car. I welcomed the chance to stroll. I wanted to walk alongside Whitman's ghost and, as Whitman said, descend to the pavements, merge with the crowd, and gaze with them. So I left Kingston, the popular Jamaican farewell echoing in my mind. Walk good, which means be safe on your journey and all the best in your endeavors. I arrived in New York City, ready to lose myself in Whitman's Manhattan crowds with their turbulent musical chorus, as he put it. I marveled at what Jane Jacobs praised as the ballet of the good city sidewalk in our old neighborhood, the West Village. I walked up past Midtown skyscrapers, releasing their energy as lively people onto the streets, and onto the Upper West Side with its regal Beaux-Arts apartment buildings, stylish residents, and buzzing streets. Onward to Washington Heights, the sidewalks spill over with an ebullient mix of young and old Jewish and Dominican American residents, past leafy Inwood, with parks whose grades row to reveal beautiful views of the Hudson River, up to my home in Kingsbridge in the Bronx, Boogie Down Bronx, with its rows of brick bungalows and apartment buildings nearby Broadway's bustling sidewalks and the peaceful expanse of Van Cortlandt Park. I went to Jackson Heights in Queens to take in people socializing around garden courtyards, speaking in Urdu, Korean, Spanish, Russian, and Hindi. And when I wanted a taste of home, where else? I headed to Brooklyn in Crown Heights for Jamaican food and music and humor, mixed with the flavor of New York City. The city was indeed my playground. I explored the city with friends, and then with a woman. It's always that part of the story. A woman I'd begun dating. She walked around endlessly with me, taking in New York City's many pleasures. Coffee shops open until pre-dawn, verdant parks with nooks aplenty, food and music from across the globe, quirky neighborhoods with quirkier residents. My impression of the city took shape during my walks with her. So of course, romantic, eh? As with a relationship, these first few months of urban exploration were all romance. The city was beguiling, exhilarating, vibrant. But it wasn't long before reality reminded me I wasn't invulnerable, especially when I walked alone. One night in the East Village, I was running to dinner when a white man in front of me turned and punched me in the chest with such force I thought my ribs had braided around my spine. I assumed he was drunk or had mistaken me for an old enemy, but found out soon enough that he'd merely assumed I was a criminal because of my race. When he discovered I wasn't what he imagined, he went on to tell me that his assault was my own fault for running up behind him. I blew off this incident as an aberration. But the mutual distrust between me and the police, that was impossible to ignore. It felt elemental. They'd enter a subway platform, I had noticed them. And I had noticed all the other black men registering their presence as well, while just about everyone else remained oblivious to them. They'd glare, I'd get nervous and glance. They'd observe me steadily, I'd get uneasy. I'd observe them back, worrying that I looked suspicious. Their suspicions would increase, and we'd continue this silent, uneasy dialogue until the subway arrived and separated us at last. I returned to the old rules I set for myself in New Orleans with elaboration. No running, especially at night. No sudden movements. No hoodies. No objects, especially shiny ones, in hand. No waiting for friends on street corners, lest I be making for a drug dealer. No standing near a corner on a cell phone for the same reason. As comfort set in, inevitably I began to break some of those rules, until a night encounter sent me zealously back to them, having learned that anything less than vigilance was carelessness. After a sumptuous Italian dinner and drinks with friends, I was jogging to the subway at Columbus Circle. I was running late, no surprise, to meet another set of friends at a concert downtown. I heard someone shouting and I looked up to see a police officer approach me with his gun, trained on me. Against the car. In no time, half a dozen cops were upon me, chucking me against the car and tightly handcuffing me. Why were you running? Where are you going? Where are you coming from? I said, why are you running? Since I couldn't answer everyone at once, something that somehow didn't seem to realize, I decided to respond first to the one who looked most likely to hit me. Though that's not exactly true. I also tried to respond to the one who seemed most buffed out, or as Americans say, roided out, where the hit would be the most painful. I was surrounded by a swarm and tried to focus on just one without inadvertently aggravating the others. It didn't work. As I answered that one, the others got frustrated that I wasn't answering them fast enough. And so they barked at me. One of them, digging through my already emptied pockets, asked if I had any weapons. The question more really an accusation. Another badgered me about where I was coming from, as if on the 15th round, I decided to tell him the truth that he had imagined. Though I kept saying, calmly of course, which meant trying to manage a tone that ignored my racing heart and their spittle-filled shouts in my face, that I had just left friends 2 blocks down the road who were all still there and could vouch for me, to meet other friends whose text message on my phone could verify that, yes sir, yes officer sir, it made no difference. For a black man, to assert your dignity before the police was to risk assault. In fact, the dignity of black people meant less to them, or so I found, which is why I was always felt safer being stopped in front of white witnesses rather than black witnesses. The cops had less regard for the witness and entreaties of black onlookers, whereas the concern of white witnesses usually registered in them. A black witness asking a question or politely raising an objection could quickly become a fellow detainee. Deference to the police then was mandatory for a safe encounter. The cops ignored my explanations and my suggestions and continued to snarl at me. All except one of them, a captain. He put his hand on my back and said to no one in particular. If he was running for a long time, he would have been sweating. He then instructed that the cuffs be removed. He told me that a black man had stabbed someone earlier 2 or 3 blocks away. Mind you, earlier was like 7 hours. And somehow I must have been the slowest runner, to have taken 7 hours to run those 2 blocks. And they were searching for him. I noted that I had no blood on me, and I told his fellow officers where I'd been and how to check my alibi, unaware that it was even an alibi, as no one had told me why I was being held. And of course, I didn't dare ask. From what I had seen, anything beyond passivity would be interpreted as aggression. The police captain said I could go. None of the cops, none, who detained me thought an apology was necessary. Like the thug who punched me in the East Village, they seemed to think it was my own fault for running. Humiliated, I tried not to make eye contact with the onlookers on the sidewalk, and I was reluctant to pass them to be on my way. By then a large crowd had gathered around. The captain, maybe noticing my shame, offered to give me a ride to the subway station. When he dropped me off and I thanked him for his help, he said, "It's because you were polite that we let you go. If you were acting up, it would have been different." I nodded and said nothing. I realized what I least liked about walking in New York City wasn't merely having to learn new rules of navigation and socialization. I mean, every city has its own. It was the arbitrariness of the circumstances that required them. An arbitrariness that made me feel like a child again, that infantilized me. When we first learn to walk, the world around us threatens to crash into us. Every step is risky. We train ourselves to walk without crashing by being attentive to our movements and extra attentive to the world around us. As adults, we walk without thinking, really. But as a black adult, I'm often returned to that moment in childhood when I'm just learning to walk. I'm once again on high alert, vigilant. Some days when I'm fed up with being considered a troublemaker on sight, I joke that the last time a cop was happy to see a black male walking was when that male was a baby taking his first steps. On many walks, I ask white friends to accompany me just to avoid being treated like a threat. I mean, that's walks in New York City, that is. In New Orleans, a white woman in my company sometimes attracted more hostility. And it is not lost on me that my women friends are those who best understand my plight. They have developed their own vigilance in an environment where they're constantly treated as targets of sexual attention. I mean, I joke and I call them women friends, female Jason Bournes. I mean, think about it. The guys, you walk into a subway in our train and you go, okay, there are 3 empty seats, which is the closest that somebody has not vomited on. But a lot of the women friends walk in and go, okay, there are 3 empty seats. Let me cross-check that with a creep factor. So that's empty, that's empty, that's empty. This is closest, but dude, you look really creepy. I'm taking the farthest one. And so it's that high alertness, that vigilance, that Jason Bourne mentality I'm talking about. So much of my walking is as my friend Rebecca once described it, a pantomime undertaken to avoid a choreography of criminality. Walking while black restricts the experience of walking, renders inaccessible the classic romantic experience of walking alone. It forces me to be in constant relationship with others, unable to join the New York flaneurs I'd read about and hope to join. Instead of meandering aimless in the footsteps of Whitman, and Melville, and Kazin, and Vivian Gornick, to name some, more often I felt I was tiptoeing in Baldwin's, the Baldwin who wrote way back in 1960. Rare indeed is the Harlem citizen, from the most circumspect church member to the most shiftless adolescent, who does not have a long tale to tell of police incompetence, injustice, or brutality. I myself have witnessed and endured it more than once. Walking as a black man has made me feel simultaneously more removed from the city, in my awareness that I'm perceived as a suspect, and more closely connected to it, in the full attentiveness demanded by my vigilance. It has made me walk more purposely in the city, becoming part of its flow rather than observing, standing apart. But it also means I'm still trying to arrive in a city that isn't quite mine. One definition of home is that it's somewhere we can most be ourselves. And when are we most ourselves? But when walking, that natural state in which we repeat one of the first actions we learned. Walking, the simple, monotonous act of placing one foot before the other to prevent falling, turns out not to be so simple if you're black. Walking alone has been anything but monotonous for me. Monotony is a luxury. A foot leaves, a foot lands, and our longing gives it momentum from rest to rest. We long to look, to think, to talk, to get away. But more than anything else, we long to be free. We want the freedom and pleasure of walking without fear, without other people's fear of us, wherever we choose. I've lived in New York City for almost a decade, well, maybe a dozen years now, given this, and I've not stopped walking its fascinating streets. And I have not stopped longing to find the solace I found as a kid on the streets of Kingston. Much as coming to know New York City streets has made it closer to home to me, the city also withholds itself from me via those very same streets. I walk them then, alternately invisible and too prominent. So I walk, caught between memory and forgetting, between memory and forgiveness. Thank you.